Okay, this portion is called vetting deals, and it's very important that when we're approaching a client, a lot of salespeople are more concerned about just getting a sale. And I've been doing this 16 years, and what I learned early on is that just because I got up on a roof and I found damage does not mean I have a sale. And so just because there is damage on the roof does not mean that damage happened in the time period that you think it might have happened. It doesn't mean that they've been with the same carrier the whole time when that damage happened or may not happen. We don't know the whole backstory, so there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to need to be asked before we take this customer on as a client. Because you got to understand something. You guys are by and large straight commission, and if these things don't become and turn into revenue, then you could literally, without vetting a deal properly, you could be in the midst of months of work that ends up in smoke because you didn't properly check all the boxes. So we're going to go over the 4 main boxes that you need to check on every deal. And if you don't do this, then your chances of success drop by a dramatic amount. So nobody wants to work for free. Nobody wants to go out and try to take on a client that doesn't even qualify. And so also I think this will help you in your sales ability. If you can wrap your mind around this mentality about the deal has to be vetted, you got to understand it's easier to find a customer than it is to find a qualified customer. It's easier to find a customer that wants a new roof, that's willing to do something, than it is to find a qualified customer. So don't just take on the customer because they're easy to take on. You want to take on a qualified customer because the qualified customer gets you to the revenue. And that's what we're here to do. So step number 1, we're going to get up on the roof and we're going to find damage. Damage is paramount, obviously, to move forward, but it's not the only thing. So as we're looking at damage, we're going to be looking for other markers as well, like spatter. Spatter exists on an oxidized metal roof. It exists on the sidewalls. It exists on the green electrical box on the side of the building where the power comes in. That thing always gets oxidized. So it can tell the story as the date and the age of the hail. It can tell you the direction of the hail, where the hail exploded. You can see the spatter fingers that come off and will point to the direction that the hail is traveling in. So there's a lot of things that spatter can tell us, and it can also define potentially when the damage happened. On a metal roof, you can see spatter, and it will damage a metal roof, and you'll see a spatter, and if there's a dent within the spatter, that tells us that we have fresh damage. So without having to pull a storm report, that is a high indicator that we're dealing with a recent storm. So we can look on the hail report and align those up. Remember, the name of the game is we're trying to align the damage with the time period, with the policy, and the state statute that all plays into this thing getting indemnified. Because if there's any opening that the carrier can bail out of paying, they're going to take it. So we have to check all these 4 boxes, and if we do, this claim will last the duration from start all the way to litigation. Because we're not just vetting this deal for ourselves. We're vetting it for our appraiser, our public adjusters, our engineers, and our lawyers. Okay? Because they won't take the deal on if they look at the file and they look at the photos and they see the policy and they see the storm report. If that all doesn't line up, they don't want to take the deal. It's too difficult because they're taking the deal oftentimes in contingency as well. Okay? So number 1 is going to be damage. Number 2, okay, is going to be a storm report or date. Now, we'll have another video on storm reports and how to interpret those, but essentially we want to look for a storm date that matches up to the damage that we see on the roof. If the storm report shows on the new carrier's watch, the carrier that we're dealing with currently, shows a 1-inch hail, but we get up on the roof and we see 2-inch hail strikes, that's not going to correlate to the storm report. We're going to have to go farther back in time and look on an older date, maybe with a different carrier. If that's the case, if we don't have spatter and we have dents that are 2-inch and we're thinking 1-inch, this is not going to correlate. So it might squash the deal. So understand that the storm report is very important. It's going to have to line up with the damage and line up with the policy period at the time of loss. Everything is predicated on the date of loss. So storm report, is going to equal the date of loss that we're trying to achieve. Okay? Number 3, policy. On every policy, there's a start and an end date. So it'll say policy inception date. It usually is the very top, the very beginning of the whole policy. It will say inception date, and it will show, 10/19 of 20 to 10/18 of 21. That's our policy period. So if the damage and the storm damage does not fall within that, then we don't need to be going after that carrier, do we? Now, if it doesn't fit within the current carrier, it doesn't mean that the deal is dead. Remember, people change carriers quite often in the commercial realm. So it might be a year-old storm or a year-and-a-half-old storm. It doesn't mean that we're out. Most of our states that we work in have a 2-year statute. Now, Arkansas has a 5-year statute on a lot of their policies. So we can go back quite far, which if you're selling in Arkansas or if you're selling anywhere, if we're not dealing with the carrier in place, we knock out one of those objections that we talked about in the prior video where we're overcoming, cancellations or rate increases. It's hard for a carrier to increase the rate when they're not the carrier in place currently, is it? If your current carrier is State Farm and your old carrier a year ago was Travelers, if you file a claim on Travelers, how are they going to raise your rates with State Farm? It's not going to happen, is it? So it will help us sell the deal if we can line these 3 things up, because oftentimes we have a new carrier in place and an old carrier responsible. Okay? So you don't always go for the current carrier. Just because there is a current carrier in place does not mean that that is the responsible party. You can actually cancel your policy today. You can say, I'm done paying you today. As long as you made the monthly premium payment on the date that the storm happened, then you're covered. Even if you cancel, you have a 2-year coverage period beyond that date. Okay? So make sure you look at the damage, you line it up with the storm report, and you read the policy for coverage, and make sure that it falls within that storm period. Now, we're going to go deeper later in other videos about how to read a policy and make sure that there's coverage, and look out for those pitfalls like cosmetic damage waivers, lack of ordinance coverage, percentage deductibles, ACV coverage, and things that can completely decimate your payout on the claim side. We want to avoid those, because the last thing we want to do is take on one of these. Even if all 4 boxes are checked, if we have a policy that has the deductible that's way too high, or an ACV coverage because due to the age of the roof, and we're not going to get any kind of payout, then we probably need to decide whether or not we want to bail from the claim. So speak to your supervisor, speak to one of your superiors, and we'll figure that out. And the last but not least, and probably one of the most important, is a solid customer. I'll just put solid owner. Now, the solid owner, what it gives you, and some of the signs of a solid owner is like, yeah, if you can get me a new roof, I'm excited. Yes, I need a new roof. We're leaking real bad. Let's do it. I don't care. The heck with that insurance company. They're not doing me any. Or if you're dealing with an old carrier, they're definitely going to be more apt to do it. What do they care about the old carrier? Oftentimes when they switch carriers, it's either for the old one was too high a cost, they got dropped, maybe they got a better rate. Maybe the carrier canceled them themselves for any reason or no reason. Oftentimes, carriers choose to non-renew after storms. So you get a storm in an area, and the carrier's like, okay, let's just drop all these because we don't want, oftentimes the misconception from the client or the insured is, oh, wow, I got dropped by that carrier. They no longer have any kind of financial obligation to me. See, because people don't know the statutes. And the statutes are built within the policy and they're built within state law, and a lot of people don't understand that. So even though your carrier is not in place now and it was a prior carrier, does not mean they're not financially responsible. I want to make that abundantly clear. So when we talk to that owner, obviously if it's an old carrier, he's going to be more solid, isn't he? If it's an old carrier that he's not currently paying, that he can't disrupt, that premium, and those rate increases and stuff like that, he's going to be more solid than if he is going after his carrier in place. You got to agree with that. But a solid owner is also like, oh, I don't want to go too far. I don't want to make my agent upset. I don't know. Let's just see what they do. And then, if they get real, that's not a solid owner. You're only going to be able to go so far with that guy. Because when the going gets tough, especially on a large loss over 400 or 500 squares, up to 1,000 squares or above that, sometimes these 7-figure claims, it's going to take a lot of battling to get that thing paid. Not every time, but oftentimes. So we need to make sure that the owner is solid and behind us. Now, we don't need to scare them and say, oh, you're going to have to sue, get lawyers and all this stuff. We don't want to tell them on the front side, because all it's going to do is scare them away. And you might just not even do the deal altogether, because nobody wants to sue everybody for anything that they do. But we do need to let them know, to say, look, we could potentially be running into these issues. Your roof is this old, and there's these multiple storms, and it's not a completely conclusive argument on the damage, because you've had so many different storms, and there's been multiple carriers, and the storm report shows that there's been several storms in a 3-year period. So we're not quite sure whose responsibility it is, and if that's the case, we might have to go get tough with them a little bit to prove whose damage this is. So I need you to make sure that you're solid behind me. I'm sorry you didn't file a claim within the last 5 years with these 50 storms. But these are the facts that we're faced with. So I'm here to try to get you a roof, but I need your support, because I'm going to spend months of my time and thousands of dollars of my company's money, potentially, to get you this roof paid for. So I need your full support, because we're coming to the table and we're putting our money where our mouth is and our time where our mouth is. So I need your full support. Can I have your support, Mr. Customer? And if he won't give that to you, then we can't take the deal. Every one of these things has to be checked. Not just 3, not 2, all 4 every single time. Because that will ensure that these things will span through all stages of the claim process, from appraiser to public adjuster, engineer, lawyer. Because once the lawyer gets it and he's willing to take it, rest assured it's getting paid 100%. I've never seen anybody lose. Okay? But without these check boxes, no lawyer is going to touch it. So understand, when we're going out, it's not about just selling a customer. It's about vetting the deal and selling a qualified customer.